or modifications to the agenda? Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John Metzinger is on vacation, so it will be Latasha Thompson delivering the fourth quarter financial report.
Okay. Noted. Anybody else? All those in favor then of the agenda, we'll just go down the list. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
Sue? Sue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't hear you the first time. All right, then we'll move on to public comment period. Anybody who wants to address the board this evening, you can press the raise hand button, or I think it's *9 to
Eric,
indicate that you want to speak with the
Eric, just for the record, that was a yes for Ryan as well.
I'm sorry, Ryan, I missed you. I apologize.
It's okay.
Keith, do we have anybody who wants to address the board this evening?
Thank you, Chairman Muller. Yes, we do. And also, I received via email a comment for the board meeting. Would you like for me to read that?
Yeah, we can start with that. Go ahead.
Okay. This is from Sinovia Guevara. She writes, I take Route 30 and the Wave bus daily. I reviewed the temporary changes and was disappointed there were no changes for Route 30. The bus route needs to be reinstated because of safety concerns. 3 examples. 1, a coworker has missed the Wave twice, and it resulted in a 2+ mile walk in high heat. In one instance, the bus driver failed to stop, and she couldn't walk back to the Wagner stop on time. She came into work red-faced and had a temperature of 100 degrees. She couldn't work until she had cooled down. 2, I've witnessed several times where the number of passengers exceeded the 4-person limit on the Wave. Recently, 6 waited at the Meyer stop and 2 couldn't get on. The driver took those who needed to make the bus first. I heard there was a wheelchair-bound woman who said this was the 2nd time she had been left behind. And 3, my sister has a schedule that has her miss the Wave bus by 15 minutes. If the bus were in place, she could easily make it to work and back home. She has to rely on Uber and has been stranded before. She has a boot on her leg, which would make it difficult to make a bus if she gets stranded again. With winter coming, frostbite is a concern. There will be no safe option for those that can't fit on the Wave bus or missed it for whatever reason. Please reinstate the Route 30. Regards, Sinovia.
Thank you. And is there anybody from who's attending live the meeting via Zoom or WebEx that wants to address the board this evening?
Yes, we do. We have Ms. Barney. Ms. Barney, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good, okay. There is a continuing big problem with the whole telephone system. In the past 2 weeks, for example, sometimes they call with the automatic thing that tells me your bus will be there, be ready, but sometimes they don't. So I have to decide when to go down and sit and wait, etc. Today, I wanted to be picked up sooner. I didn't know I was going to get done earlier at the hospital. And they told me to, they said call back, and they arranged it. And they said come down at 4:30 instead of 5:30. But the driver was there 15 minutes early and nobody called to tell me. There's just all sorts of missing communications. And I'm really concerned that I may miss my that I may miss my ride. In fact, that happened 2 weeks ago. I had a pickup at the library, and I didn't see any van or vehicle. And when I called, they said, "Well, it was there and it went away," but nobody called me to tell me, and I didn't see anything. So they said, "No, we can't send another one. That's your problem." There's something wrong with people not calling and, you know, and doing the same thing repetitively so that we don't know what to expect. I don't know if it's new people or unclarity in the teaching. And of course, sometimes the system breaks down. Very often you can't reach the line 3, either because they're so busy they don't have enough people to answer, or because the system is down. And it transfers, when it's down, it transfers you to the information line, and they of course don't know what to tell you about your bus. So I wish somebody would look into the electronic system that we have, because it's not that, yes, it would be nice to have more, but not at this time. It needs to be done. They need to be able to do dependably what they have to do. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
One moment, please. Yes, we have Mr. Jim Mogensen.
Okay.
Mr. Mogensen, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, so the first thing I just wanted to say is just in general, because I've been in formal board meetings with the new Open Meetings Act, I think all the board members have to say their name also and where they're calling from in their county of residence. Anyway, so you might want to do that just to be official. The second thing, and I am Jim Mogensen, and I live in Ann Arbor, and I'm from Washtenaw County. The second thing relates to the Title VI plan. The first thing I want to do is to thank Brian Smith for reaching out and making sure I had the plan and knew it was on the agenda. Alas, unfortunately, too many deadlines and not enough time, and I wasn't able to do my usual long comment. But there are a couple things I do want to say. I first started working on Title VI with the AETA during the George W. Bush administration. And during that time, they had the situation where you essentially had to file a Title VI plan, and that was essentially it. And then during the Obama administration, there was the new circular that went out with more extensive things that agencies, authorities had to do. And so now we could be back where you have to file the plan, and you have to do it by the end of November, and everybody recognizes this is a problem, but there's this need to do this, and you need to do it for the triennial plan. So you do have to approve the plan tonight. But one thing I would say is that the initial comprehensive reevaluation of all the routes and services, that was based on time performance, at least in the consultant's report, which was pre-pandemic. You have to, the question will be, when you do that, when we get to the point where you do the restoration in the memo that the CEO put in, Mr. Carpenter put out, you have to, I would think you would have to look at the new plan as it relates to the former service and justify those things. The last thing I'll say, because I know I'm taking time here, is the LAC task force report. And one of the things that I remember, and I couldn't find it again, but one of the reasons we have an LAC is that there's not just a state regulation, but a federal regulation that requires you to have one, or something like that. You have to have an advisory committee. So that happens with a number of these things. I will go and search and try to find some of these things, but I just wanted to give you that heads up that one of the challenges is independent of the new policy governance setup, there are still these regulations that are still out there that require you to have some of these things. Thank you, as always, for your time and attention and patience.
Thank you. And Keith, do we have anybody else?
No, we don't have anyone else at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, we'll close the public comment period and move on to section 1.3, which is general announcements. Does anybody from the board or the staff have any general announcements this evening not related to the agenda? Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Preliminary announcement and a bit of a clarification to something Mr. Mogensen said. We are working with Mel Moskovitz at Dykema to make sure we have clear understanding of changes to the Open Meetings Act. It does appear that starting in January, those of you who vote on boards electronically, in addition to stating your name at least once during the meeting, will also be compelled to state your county of residence and your actual physical location during the meeting. Apparently, this is there to ensure that you actually have a local state of emergency and you're not just playing hooky. So please bear with us. We're going to get some updated information from Mel and clarity to you. But those, there are some county meetings that are starting to do this right away, but it's pretty clear that it doesn't start until January. So I look forward to bringing you more information maybe next month.
Thank you. And I assume we won't have to give the address of where we're calling from. We just have to give the building. We'll see. Thank you, Matt. Any other general announcements? Okay. Moving on then to our consent agenda, we have minutes, meeting reports, and approvals of the FTA safety plan and Title VII, which are in the packet. Can I have somebody move the consent agenda into the record? Kathleen, seconded by Kyra. Any discussion or debate? All right, let's move forward. Move forward with the vote on that. We'll go down and indicate yes or no for the consent agenda. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that is approved. Thank you. We'll move on then to policy monitoring and development section, section 3. 3.1 committee meeting discussion. Does anybody have any questions on the meetings or meeting minutes that we just passed into approval? Not seeing or hearing any, we'll move on then to 3.2, board's work plan for the fiscal year. We can start with a board retreat, excuse me, board retreat discussion. You probably saw, if you looked at the minutes of the governance committee meeting, we did have a fairly lengthy discussion about the retreat planning. Kathleen was also in attendance there. I think the general feeling of the governance committee was that we might, instead of sitting on a Zoom meeting for 8 hours or 7 hours, it might be broken up and best served if we break it up into 2 different sessions for maybe a half day. I think the general focus of the governance committee's recommendation is that we don't lose sight of long-range planning and the future of public transit in our coverage area, specifically for us, both on a local and, if necessary, regional level. You may have seen in the minutes, again, we recommend 2 half days. One, mostly hearing from staff about what they see coming up. As Mr. Carpenter indicated at the last, I think, board meeting, it may take even several years to get back to the level of service that we had pre-pandemic. Nobody really knows for sure, but that's a possibility. And so the recommendation is at least we spend some time in being educated by the staff about exactly where we are, what they see going into the future, and we spend some time on our long-range planning and visioning process. and how we communicate that and connect with our owners, whether or not, and necessarily speaking, that will involve a debate or maybe a revisit of our ridership versus coverage topic that, as we've kind of settled on in the past, we always wanted to focus on ridership, but we are seeing, like the person who submitted a written comment earlier, maybe the coverage issue might take precedent now over the ridership coverage over ridership. We may have to reverse that or think about kind of a balance of the two at least, and resource allocation may go along with that as well. So I think at this time, we're looking at a time frame of possibly February, and we would like to see if we can at least have this wrapped up before the budget process. So to the extent that there are any adjustments that the staff would need to make once they begin the budget cycle, they would have some clear direction from the staff to do that. So I guess just kind of looking for some feedback and input, and kind of a soft recommendation, I guess, from the governance committee at this point is breaking it into 2 half days, looking into the second quarter, fiscal quarter of the year, i.e. probably February, and dividing it into at least one session for long-range visioning and planning, specifically focused on our current condition during the pandemic, and maybe a precursor to that with some board education or staff input educating us about where we are. And just looking to get some feedback from you all about how that might work. And Jesse, you may want to mute.
Well, I just thought Jesse's whole family weighed in. That was really helpful for all of us.
She's in favor.
Well, I really thought I had muted my microphone. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
I loved it, Jesse.
Well, I'm glad somebody did.
Hey, Eric,
Yeah.
I think your approach sounds great. I think given the way we're working, I had to conduct a retreat of 48 people on Zoom, and it was tough, really tough. And breaking it down into a couple of smaller segments, I think is very smart. And it sounds like you've picked good topics that work well as 2 separate sessions. I'm supportive.
Thank you. Anybody else with any input or guidance, direction, thoughts, feedback? If not, then perhaps the governance committee will then take some steps to move forward planning. Does anybody, well, I should ask, does anybody see a problem to the extent we can predict even 90 days in advance now? I mean, February is only about 90 days away, but does anybody see a problem with February being, at least for one of the sessions, a problem at all? Is anybody going to be traveling the country in their RV or anything like that? Okay.
I don't have any problem with that. I do want to, despite what you may have heard, I was listening during that whole talk. So I also want to voice my support for the split retreat. I wanted to just clarify something regarding the ends review. We've normally, I think, done that during the retreat, and it's not listed under the board retreat topics. Has that just been handled under the retreat because that was a convenient place to do it, or is there a reason, like when, or I guess where is the, are we going to be doing the ends review during, is the proposal to do the ends review during a board meeting instead of the retreat?
We have done it in retreats in the past. We just felt as a governance committee, to be honest, that overhauling our ends or reviewing them probably would not be as valuable at this point as long-range strategic planning during what we see, and readjusting our focus to having a more short or medium-term outlook during the pandemics, insofar as we can foresee how long this is going to last. We certainly have seen some good medical news come out lately, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I think we can make some other arrangements for ends review to do it in committee work, and not to say that we don't need to review the ends this year, but we've taken several cracks at it over the last few years. And I think we feel pretty good about them. There's nothing in policy governance or in our own rules or bylaws or anything that says we have to review them every year anyhow. But we just felt like the medium to long range planning during this unprecedented time would be more valuable for us right now. And I think, Matt, did you have a hand up?
Thank you. The ends report is due to you next month. We are putting the finishing touches on it, so it will be coming to you. And certainly the board can discuss it at the board meeting with the monitoring report. I think what we're thinking about with the retreats has been sort of a full-blown discussion of the ends. I think Chairman Mahler is correct. I don't recall anyone suggesting that much work was necessary on it, but I guess we'll find out when the monitoring report comes in.
Mike?
I could be wrong, but I believe we have someplace in the policy manual that says that the board needs to review the ends once a year. And it might even give the timing for doing that, but it certainly doesn't say in a retreat or anything. But Matt, do you recall if I'm right or not?
I believe you are, but I think it's in reference to the monitoring report. How much time you want to spend on updating or rewriting the ends is a decision you guys make year by year.
And as Matt said, we're going to get a report on that next month. So, any other comments, questions? Any suggestions for direction or topics in particular that people would like to focus on? If you don't have any right now, feel free to send them to me. Shoot me an email or give me a call, shoot me a text. Happy to talk it through. We're open for suggestions. Okay. All right, board retreat done. We'll move on to section 322, which is the LAC task force report. And Ms. Mozak-Betts will take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the board packet, there is an issue brief regarding the role of the LAC, along with 4 attachments. The first attachment is an article on tips for creating advisory boards and committees, and it was provided by our governance coach, Rose Mercier. The second attachment is a letter from Chris White, who used to work for AAATA, and it chronicles the history and the evolution of the LAC. It also lists why it was formed, and Mr. Mogensen had referenced that it is an entity that exists legally, so that was important to note. The third attachment is the current charge to the LAC, which has not been updated since 2009. And the fourth attachment is a list of issues and possible options. These documents were first presented to the governance committee at the end of last month, I believe it was, and a task force was then formed, which consisted of Mr. Mahler, Ms. Sims, and myself, and we were tasked with sort of trying to put all this together and figure out how it all fits into policy and everything. We have met with Rose Mercier, and we have discussed their current role, the LAC's current role, and the board's vision of that role. And from that meeting, Ms. Mercier is crafting policy language for consideration by the board. And she is working on that right now. We're hoping to present the beginnings of that at the next governance meeting. It's important for me to acknowledge that the LAC is has been valuable over all the years. We appreciate their operational input and their guidance, and that they provide both to the CEO and to the staff and the board as well. We value their communication and their support, And we wish to define them further and expand in areas of things like ownership linkage, looking at ends and policy, and planning as well to help support the board and our goals. So that's where we're at right now. I realize that you all may have some questions or some concerns, or you may be happy with what's been presented. So I would love to hear your feedback, if you have any.
Any questions for Kathleen on the LAC developments? And, you know, just so you, and you may have seen this in the minutes, everybody, that the kind of the discussion at the governance committee level, which, you know, Kathleen so eloquently advised us at, we kind of decided, you know, we kind of discussed the ins and outs and the merits of, you know, having the LAC be more operationally focused and therefore kind of reporting into or being kind of the CEO's responsibility to oversee, or that they take a more policy-focused board leaning role insofar as they would kind of advise on policy, strategic issues, and you know, help us with governing from a policy ownership linkage point of view. So that was kind of the two directions we were looking at. We discussed those at length with Rose, as Kathleen said, Kyra and Kathleen and myself. And she's going to work on some language that kind of leans more towards more operational focus. And so I think just from a conceptual level, you know, it's probably good if the board, you know, gives their input into, and I think this is, you know, the operational focus is probably, we, you know, ultimately decided or believe that the operational focus is more in keeping with what the LAC would like and would want to do, and you know, what they're adept at, and that we could always consult them with policy issues on an occasional basis too, in terms of ends or just, you know, simple ownership linkage, you know, spot policy decisions. So just so you know what Rose is, you know, tentatively working on, it's more of a charge or a policy that would lend itself to a more operational focus that would be kind of delegated, and responsibility would be delegated to the CEO and the staff to interface with, and they would, you know, advise primarily on those issues. So thoughts about that, or any questions about anything that that Kathleen or I or Kyra or the governance committee can assist on. Okay. Not seeing or hearing anyone. I don't think so. All right. All right. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you again for all your very hard work on this. And we'll look forward to see what we get from Rose Mercier very soon. And if anybody has any thoughts or questions about anything after the fact, please, you know, contact Kathleen or myself.
Yes, thank you.
All right, and we'll move on to section 323, which is the bylaw review introduction. And I think Mr. Carpenter will take it from here. And this starts on page 42 of the packet.
Yes, thank you. There's sort of two items. The bylaw review is a verbal update, and then I do have a proposal for your consideration about the monitoring reports. Last year, the board adopted a work plan which included a review of the bylaws. This was considered something of an important housekeeping item. Then the pandemic landed, and I'll be honest with you, we kind of lost track of that project. A few months ago, we found it again and resurrected it. The governance committee approved a scope of work from our legal counsel, Dykema, who have begun their work. I think I sent an email out to each of you a week or so ago, just letting you know, and including some of the background material. So they will want to reach out to each of you and just pick your brain and see what you think about the bylaws, and ultimately, combined with some best practices, some of the updates that are inevitably probably necessary by this point, They will bring back a list of recommended changes for your consideration, probably I would imagine, probably around New Year's. So just a verbal heads up, Mel and his colleague Andrew may be reaching out to you to schedule some time. Keith is there to assist, to just ask you what you think about the bylaws. That's all. Eric, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I sure was. Any questions about the bylaw review? Okay. Then we'll move on to 3.3, which is the monitoring report scheduling proposal, which is in the packet. That starts on page 42. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as we all know, it's the board's fiduciary responsibility to oversee organizational performance, and this occurs for us through the monitoring reports. The board establishes its expectations in advance via policy, and then monitors compliance via the monitoring reports that I and staff submit to you. The board can change your schedule of monitoring at any time. The schedule is actually a part of your board policy manual. In the back, it is Appendix A. So we've been using that current schedule since we adopted policy governance in 2017. We've learned quite a lot on that. When it was originally set up, everything was set up sort of default at least once a year, and we thought maybe it would make sense to stagger certain things out in a certain order. Some of that has proved to be a pretty good idea. Some of it has, frankly, flopped. So we've kept notes about various comments we've heard from you, opportunities for improvements, suggestions from you and from staff, and we have prepared a proposal that we think sort of pulls all of these things together. For your consideration, it would be a proposal to change the scheduling of the monitoring reports to streamline it. For your consideration, it's something of a housekeeping item, but we think it's something that hopefully you might see as making your job a little bit easier and streamlining things. I won't go into all the detail in the packet, but I would like to hit a couple of the highlights as examples. As you can see on page 42, we sort of bullet point the main changes. One thing we heard very clearly from you that policies 3 and 4 are frankly not very long, and when they're staggered out across 6 months, it can be easy to kind of lose the thread. So why not just do them all in 1 month? That way it's short and done and together. There are some policies like cash and investments that we heard from the Finance Committee. It's great to see the investments, but every 12 months, it's just a snapshot. We wish we could monitor them more frequently. So why not twice a year is the suggestion here. There are some policies like emergency CEO succession, which we've really come to see don't change very much from year to year. And you probably don't lose a lot of oversight if you went to every other year, perhaps every even numbered year. Staff compensation and benefits also frankly don't change that frequently. Every other year might be more of a streamlined approach for you to consider. We do have one policy, 2.7, the end focus of grants. This was adopted on the mistaken assumption that this policy, that this agency makes grants, that we give money to other people, and that you should be assured that that money is being used to advance your goals. That was part of the policy governance template that actually, in retrospect, doesn't apply to us at all. We do not make grants to anyone. We receive subsidies from the federal and state government that are called grants, but I think that that's just confusing the point. So that might be an opportunity for you to streamline. There is a policy 2.8 on asset protection, which largely deals with the physical plant and assets of the organization, the buildings, the vehicles. Very important, but not something that changes quickly. You could monitor that every 2 years and probably not lose a lot of information, frankly. We've had to resort to telling you about our preventative maintenance program for bus brakes, and it really didn't seem like it really grabbed your attention previously. So that is something that could perhaps be done every other year, except there is one part of that policy dealing with the agency's public credibility. Certainly an important asset that the board probably would want to monitor more frequently. That perhaps could be moved to external relationships and monitored every year. And then there were some other housekeeping items about making sure that the quarterly reports were happening in the same month. I was surprised to discover they actually aren't in Schedule A now. And there is an older policy in 211 about giving regular updates about capital projects. And that seems a little redundant now that you have a construction policy that speaks in much greater detail about the sort of information and updates you want on construction projects. So those are a list of suggestions that we've kept and sort of organized for your consideration. Hopefully to sort of streamline the monitoring process. We'd like you to ask you to consider them this month or next and perhaps approve or amend them as you see fit. We will be bringing forward the ends monitoring report next month regardless. So perhaps this new schedule could start in January. You would only need a motion from you to amend your policy manual to adopt these changes or changes similar to them and to begin those changes on January to make this decision. So with that, happy to answer any questions you may have.
So the proposed schedule is that Matt went through is in the packet. Any questions about that or any questions or comments about Matt's comments? Jesse?
I have a few questions. Overall, this is perfectly fine with me. I think I just need a couple points of clarification. The 2.7 is one that I brought up before. I know that we don't grant, but we do pass through funding to other organizations. And I believe when I've asked you before, there is a subjective decision that goes into which some of the who receives some of that funding. Isn't that true? Or is there another group that's making that decision, or are we part of the decision-making process for who receives that funding?
So what Jesse's referring to is we are what's called in federal terminology a designated recipient. So we are eligible to receive federal funding from the Federal Transit Administration. We then can be used as a conduit to pass through funding to other smaller agencies. You might want to think about it as the distribution plumbing for federal money. It comes into the state of Michigan through MDOT, gets sent to the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, gets sent down to the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study, gets sent to us, and then we send it on to some smaller agencies, Jewish Family Services being a great example. Those organizations are referred to as subrecipients. By and large, we really don't have any control over those entities. I would look to Mr. Smith to correct me. Unfortunately, John knows this very well, so if Brian thinks I'm out of line, I hope he'll step in. We don't really have a lot of control over who receives those funds or what they do with it, aside from a rather annoying federal obligation that we're on the hook to make sure that those subrecipients meet federal rules. That comes up as part of our triennial review. We don't write the rules, we just have to make sure they follow them. So I really don't think we have a lot of say in where that money goes. Brian, does that sound correct to you?
That's correct.
So the funding isn't competitive, and we're not making a judgment on you receive this money when you don't. I think
No.
that's my only concern with this policy is if there are decisions being made.
Well, I'll clarify it. To my knowledge, staff have no hand in making a decision about where this money goes. The board has no hand in making this decision. We certainly don't on my end. So I really think it's kind of out of our hands. We're just part of the plumbing. Brian?
So there is one discretionary grant program, but in order for us not to be in that position, they actually have a separate committee that does the awarding of it for I believe it's the 5310, which is the non-urban area funding that we end up being the designated recipient of for just that reason. So we're the only time where that may actually happen, it's delegated outside so that there's no conflict of interest.
I have two more questions if people can just bear with me. The second one was regarding 2.8.3, which is the policy that says the CEO shall not unreasonably expose the organization, its board, or staff to claims of liability. Should I be worried that could you tell me how that one is routine and not something that we should be checking on a regular basis or like on an annual basis?
I think we've interpreted that in the past to mean to mean that we carry adequate insurance. And certainly if that's something the board wants to monitor every 12 months, it can. It's entirely up for your decisions.
Okay. And I'm sorry, the note here was actually look up past monitoring reports to see what Matt said about that. And I failed to do that before this meeting. So thank you for covering for me, Matt. The last one is really just a point of clarification I didn't understand with number 7. You said that the offset of the service reports and the finance reports is causing problems with availability of financial data. And I just wasn't understanding how financial data, like how the service report and the finance reports were playing together. They've always struck me as independent.
Yeah, and this is kind of, in retrospect, I was surprised that this was documented in your Appendix A the way it is. You received the quarterly financial statements in November, but the operational report is supposed to come to you a month earlier in October. But Brian's operational report requires the financial information that shows up in the financial statements a month later. So he can't really complete his report in October until he has the numbers that don't show up until November. I really honestly don't know how that showed up in the paperwork. What has actually been occurring for the last few years is that you receive these reports simultaneously in the same month, as just like this month. So all I can imagine is that we made some sort of error in writing Appendix A back in 2017. And this is just sort of a housekeeping reconciliation to reflect what actually is occurring today. And logically probably needs to be that way.
Okay. Those are the questions I have. Thank you for answering them. I don't have any issue with the proposal as written.
Thank you, Jesse. Anybody else? Mike?
Certainly a lot of thought and work went into reviewing all of these monitoring reports and trying to balance what is important for the board to see and how often, and also trying to do some streamlining, which I think is an important thing to enhance how the board spends time and also efficiently and how the staff spends time. I went through every one of these and I really think Matt and his staff did an excellent job in sorting these out. I think this is a significant improvement. And I just wanted to say that I support every one of these.
Sorry. Thank you, Mike. Any other questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. And it's just part of our job. And we certainly would not be the least bit bothered if the board would like to consider this another month. It is a lot to digest, and we understand that. So whether you take action tonight or not, we're fine.
Does anybody have a reason they would not want to take action on this tonight through a motion and a vote? All right, not seeing any objection to that. I assume nobody feels uncomfortable with going forward with a vote. Kathleen?
Do we need to make a formal motion that we'd like to vote?
Yep, I was going to ask for a motion
Oh,
right now to.
I apologize.
No. Are you moving that into the record?
Yes, sir, please.
All right. Do I have a second for that motion? Rich? Thank you very much. We'll go down the line. Yes or no, the recommended updates to the monitoring schedule as drafted and presented in our packet. We're voting on that. We'll just indicate your approval or disapproval with yes or no. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. And I agree with Mike. I think this is, I did look at these. We discussed this at the governance committee a little bit, and I think it is a really great improvement. I'm in favor of every one of these. Okay, so we'll move on then to section 4, strategy and operational updates from the CEO. 4.1 is service restoration and the millage plan. And back to Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not much to talk about here. Sorry, that's not true. I do have some comments. I'm not going to read the issue brief, but I am going to try to describe it for anyone who might be listening at home, because I think it is an important thing. I apologize to board members who may have, this might seem a little redundant. I will attempt to go quickly. So, as I think we all know, when the pandemic arrived in April, we sharply reduced our services and also our expenses. We have already begun restoring some services, largely to increase our coverage and to ensure that everyone in the community has at least one mobility option. At this point, I really strongly believe that we need to start making a proactive plan for restoring our services to near full levels. Failure to plan and planning to fail, that sort of thing. So I do feel strongly we need to start this conversation. In discussions with staff, August of 2021 appears to be the best time to make that kind of a big push for a variety of reasons. One, as much as we might want to do it now, the pandemic is still with us. And as you see in some earlier reports, ridership is still low. Then as we see Mr. Mahler mentioned earlier, we do see some green shoots with good news about vaccines, that we may see a light at the end of the tunnel. We need to be prepared next year to help the community bounce back, particularly if we have a surge of students returning to a safe university in the fall, families returning to school and to work. We also, frankly, have funding available, and although we might want to do this quicker, August of next year is probably about as fast as staff are going to be able to do it. However, there are some risks associated with this plan, and it's important that we discuss them. They largely deal with returning expenditures back to their normal pre-pandemic level, and how that intersects with some of your board policies, particularly prohibitions about fiscal jeopardy and also acknowledging our tolerance for risk going into a period of continuing uncertainty. The uncertainty that we have really breaks down into three areas. Obviously, the pandemic, the associated economic implications of that, and there's a certain amount of political uncertainty that I will refer to in a moment. Although I do have your delegated authority to restore the services, these decisions will impact future budgets, which you have authority for. So in that respect, I really do see this as a joint decision and something that staff and the board really should work to be on the same page about before we move forward. Now, in this respect, our timeline here is actually an asset to us. We have essentially 3 months to discuss this here in this format until the January board meeting. After that point, we start to get into a crucial period of operational planning where I need to give detailed instructions to staff on how to proceed. For example, starting in February of next year, we're going to need to go to the public with detailed route plans and suggestions so that they can have a genuine chance to have feedback on the details. So we need to at least sort of have our consensus together by that point. We can still change direction after that point, but it becomes a little more problematic. We might have to walk back things we've said in public. So I would prefer to have these conversations now. So I hope to have this joint decision with you sort of start this evening and settled hopefully by January, but we'll see how it goes. To kick off this discussion in a transparent manner, we have an issue brief in the packet. It really focuses on what we perceive to be the highest level risks and benefits that we need to be considering at this point. We're not talking about route details. We're not talking about the details of which routes come back yet. That would be a follow-up conversation in a little bit. We're putting this information in the packet, obviously, for the board and your discussion, but we're also going to be sharing this with staff and soliciting their feedback starting tomorrow. And we welcome the public to give us their feedback on this restoration plan as well. You can visit our website to contact us via the emails functions or telephone, or you can email us at tellus@theride.org. So a quick summary of the proposal for service restoration really comes down to a question of cash flow over the next 24 months and circles around the question of, will we have enough money? So we have to acknowledge that our revenue has been pretty severely disrupted. Our fares are down, and ridership and the associated fare revenue will take some time to return, and we can expect it to be much lower than normal for some time. Local property taxes have remained stable, but we are anticipating they may wobble. The state and federal governments provide a considerable amount of support for the public transit system here in Ann Arbor and across the country. Federal relief is a big deal, and the state government in particular is an important point of risk that I will return to in just a moment. Now, our costs were reduced with our services, but we are essentially proposing to restore our expenses back to about 100% of what they had been before. Now, the CARES Act, which comes up from time to time, is a key part of this. Because we made some difficult decisions months ago, we are fortunate to still have most of our federal CARES Act funding intact. We would like to begin to draw that down more assertively between 2021 and 2023. It is important to remember that this is one-time money, and when it's gone, it's gone. At this point, I'd like to ask you perhaps to refer to page 48 in your packet, and there's a very aesthetically pleasing graph developed by our own John Metzinger there that we can use for this part of the conversation. So the decision that we're really talking about is laid out in this graph. You'll see in here basically a ski slope, a downward trajectory that represents two options for our spending. The light green line, the line on the top, represents a projection of our current expenses. If we leave services in their truncated form that they are today, that is essentially how fast we will spend the money. The dark green line below it is the proposed restoration of service back to about 100%. So you can see obviously the difference here. The top light green line essentially means we spend less and therefore the funds last longer. The darker green line below it means we're spending more quickly, and it will simply run out faster. Now, I should also note that the orange space between the dark green line is an attempt to depict the amount of CARES Act funding we will have access to. It is linked to the spending of the dark green line. So you can see that as the dark green line moves forward, it draws down those federal CARES Act funds. Now, there is additional complication to this. Before the pandemic hit, I think we all realized we were struggling with some structural deficits. And this essentially boils down to we were spending money faster than we were bringing it in. The root of this issue lies with the 5-year transit improvement program, which frankly just didn't bring in enough money to pay for itself. So we've been struggling with this issue off and on since about 2014. The deficits were expected to appear in 2021, but in an interesting twist of fate, the CARES Act has allowed us to sort of delay that or defer it, push it off until about 2024. That gives us a little breathing room, which we certainly hadn't anticipated, but is very welcome. I'd like to maybe ask you to turn the page at this point to page 49. The graph on page 48, John and I talked quite a lot about, and it's a good graph, but it does not actually depict the actual pattern of our cash flow. It depicts the lowest point of cash on hand, basically, in each year. Our actual cash flow looks more like a sawtooth. The reason for that, you may recall, is that every year we get an influx of local property taxes that replenishes our coffers, brings us up to a higher level, and we then spend it down every year. That's an important nuance. The earlier graph, you can see the downhill trajectory driving into our operational reserve, but it isn't as bad as that graph actually makes it out to be. And we inserted this graph to make sure that that was understood. You can see better here that, for example, in fiscal year 2023, the dark green line does dip below the line representing our reserve. So that would mean that, yes, we are implying that we would be spending down our reserve a little bit as part of that action. However, you can also see that that's a very momentary situation. It would literally last for a couple of weeks before the property tax revenue would arrive, refill the coffers, and we would be right back up to where we were. But it is also undeniable that the following year, the dip into the reserves would be more severe. So that is that structural deficit showing up year after year, but we're trying to make sure that the cash flow part of that is described as well. So we do have an opportunity here. If we return back to page 48, a new opportunity we didn't have before was that our millage is naturally going to expire in 2023. We will most likely need to run a millage of some sort in August of 2022. Now, our CARES Act funding can carry us through 2022 through 2023, even at full spending. So we can delay the decision on how to deal with that structural deficit until after 2022. The community is not going to need to make a decision about continuing those higher level transit services or not at this time. So you can see, while those two solid green lines illustrate the joint decision that we're talking about now, The dotted green lines at the bottom of the graph on page 48 illustrate another decision that we will need to make at some point in the future. And that's a question about what the mill rate's going to be in the future. And I confess to you that these are very illustrative. These are little more than guesswork, frankly, so please don't take the specific mill rates as gospel. But essentially, John and I believe that if we maintain the 0.7 mil, we will continue to spend down into the reserve closer and closer to the red line of insolvency. Whereas a higher mill rate, perhaps of 1.0 mils, could begin to sort of bottom out the problem and begin to pull us back up. So that's what that is intended to illustrate. So this proposal shows us sort of how we can make an immediate decision and get us through the next few years. But the structural deficits are still there and they will remain. We will not be able to avoid a hard question pertaining to those deficits. Either the community will need to decide to make do with less service, or it will need to somehow increase funding or raise taxes to maintain the services we have. I firmly believe that that decision, frankly, is unavoidable. It is in our future, and we will need to deal with it. But we do have some decisions we can make now that affect the when and the how that decision will unfold. You can sort of see on both of these graphs the implications of higher and lower spending decisions now do have an effect of when the deficits begin to bite. And particularly on page 49, you can begin to see them in particular in future years. The reality is that they don't there's not as big a difference in spending as you might imagine. And the impact of going into deficits is roughly the same. If we maintain this lower level of funding, it will not avoid that difficult decision. We will not be able to continue forever. Although John and I need to update our forecasts, I am very nervous that we frankly will not even reach the next millage renewal in 2027, although that's a long way off and a lot can happen between now and then. Another consideration is that as this pandemic ends, the community will need us to restore full service, and it's going to be difficult for us to argue that we should keep services and expenses lower while we still have this CARES Act funding, particularly if the only benefit is, perhaps 6 or 12 months of additional time before deficits arrive. So that has to do with the when. The how of the deficit really comes down to, I believe, asking the voters in a millage whether they prefer to maintain the existing level of services or if they'd like to have a lower level of service or perhaps even a higher level of service. So I think that that's ultimately how that will need to be resolved. But again, that is a decision for the future. The joint decision in front of us the next couple of months is just whether or not we restore service spending back up in August of next year. So the CEO's proposal for discussion between now and January, we are suggesting that we restore 100% of our expenses, at least for services, starting in August of next year. We do have many months before that arrives, so we have a lot of time to consider this and seek questions. And we do intend to use our CARES Act more aggressively until it's exhausted, probably around 2023. But this will allow us to, restore the services that the community has come to expect. Between now and the end of 2021, we will also have to make that decision about the August 2022 millage and what we will ask voters to weigh in on. Now, there are risks associated with this approach. The biggest one is that political uncertainty I mentioned to you, and that really gets focused on the state of Michigan budget in fiscal years 2022 and 2023. What's happening right now, and it's important to understand, the state of Michigan through MDOT gives us a lot of our operating budget, about 25 to 30%. They were able to maintain that this year, even as state revenue shuttered during the pandemic. The state takes in its revenue through income and sales tax, both of which have been hit pretty hard as the pandemic forced economic and commercial shutdowns. So they used a lot of couch cushion funding, for lack of a better word, to keep 2021 whole. 2022, they were very cagey about that. They didn't make any commitments about those future years. So we're really not certain what to expect. If there was a cut to state funding in future year, we may have to pull in our horns on some of this restoration proposal, simply because we would not have enough money to do it. But it's hard to know exactly how this will play out. It's a bit of a domino situation. The states, including Michigan, many of them are looking to the federal government for rescue or relief from the pandemic's economic impacts. My understanding is that President-elect Biden is quite willing to do this. The House of Representatives is quite willing to do this. The Republican caucus in the Senate is not. So we do seem to have a bit of a stalemate at a federal level. If there is no federal relief funding for states like Michigan, that would probably not become apparent until next summer, possibly about the same time we're restoring services. They make their decisions on the same fiscal calendar we do. So we might not know until very late in the game. If they don't have a rescue package for states, the state of Michigan may be forced to make some cuts, and we may be forced to change course. But I would advise us to make a plan, stick with it, and then wait and see how some of this stuff shakes out. So that's the first big risk, that those dominoes might start falling. It's not a risk so much as it is a point that we will need to work on. The details about how and which fixed route and paratransit services are going to be restored, those are things we're going to have to sort out over the next 6 to 12 months. This includes whether or not to contract out the paratransit service or keep it in-house as it is right now. So we look forward to bringing forward those details in February. Longer term planning, sort of the longer term aspirations that Chairman Mahler was referring about in the retreat are certainly important and definitely something we look forward to discussing in the next few months anyway. But they're kind of a separate track. They're related to this decision, but they're not dependent on it per se. And then finally, as you can tell from this evening, it's not easy to explain all of this stuff. So communication becomes a very important part of explaining this proposal to our owners, our customers, and our elected leaders. So in closing, I know that was a lot. Thank you very much for your patience. We have a lot to discuss and get comfortable with by January. There are a lot of considerations, but there really is at this point one central question: whether or not we want to restore full expenses or not. What is our tolerance? What are our priorities and tolerances for risk? So with that, Mr. Chair, introducing this subject I think is important, and I'm very eager to hear feedback from the board this month and over the next 2 months. And I turn it back to you. Thank you.
Let's open it up for discussion. I'm sure there are a lot of questions about this topic and timing and otherwise. So Raymond, go ahead and lead us off.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Matt, for that update. I'm excited about this plan. I think you've all heard me advocate for restoring service as soon as possible. So I like that we are mapping that out. That has always been kind of a concern of mine. I think we've had to demonstrate, that we are providing a valuable service to the community, and we need to kind of show a promise kept leading up to the next millage. So I'm excited about this. I know that the future is uncertain, and I know we may have to make adjustments. If the financial situation shakes out differently than what our projections are, we might have to scale things back. So I'm not naive to, assume that, this is set in stone. But I think it's important for us to kind of set that target, move towards it, and then make adjustments if needed. So I applaud Matt and the team for really kind of putting thoughts behind this and mapping out a strategy that can get us back to full service within a time frame that hopefully aligns with, you know, vaccines and when things start getting back to normal. So thank you for your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Other board members want to weigh in? Kathleen, go ahead. Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. Mike, go ahead.
Matt, you did an excellent job of explaining a very complicated and difficult thing. And I think it has helped greatly by looking at the two charts in there that John prepared. And I particularly like figure 1 in the fact that it shows our CARES Act balance and how we really are depending on that to do the service restoration. And it shows it doesn't fully run out, if I'm reading this correctly, until about the end of fiscal year 23, but it's almost run out at the beginning of that year. And I really also very much compliment you on your comments you made at the end regarding risk, because if you hadn't, I would have had a lot to say there. And I very much agree with you in terms of focusing on what is, I think, the greatest risk, and that is state funding. They just are not going to have the money without the government, the federal government, coming in and helping significantly. And that's nobody knows what's going to happen there. Nobody. And I particularly liked your statements about that time that we may know what the budget is going to be for the state and whether there's any additional federal support in there, that we need to be prepared to change our plans if we don't have the revenue that is assumed here. I support being aggressive on restoring services because we have this cushion of the CARES Act. But again, I just want to emphasize how important it is for us to be flexible and be prepared to change our plans if this doesn't come about as these charts show.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Others? Rich?
Yeah, so I echo what Raymond and Mike have said, and I know the rest of the board is probably thinking too. Number one, I mean, this is great that you are and the team are trying to figure out how do we get back to full service. I mean, based on the public comments that we've had over the last bunch of months, I mean, it's a critical service, which is great, right? I mean, it shows the importance of having this public transportation system. And that actually leads me to my question, which I think we all know, but I just wanted to bring it up, right? Because if we look at that figure 1 on page 48, there's the millage that's called out a couple times in there, and it shows an importance, even with a 0.7 versus a 1.0 mils, the impact that it can have. And so I'm kind of curious what this plot would look like if we actually were able to separate out the millage impact between those two green lines. Because for me, I don't know if the public, when we come around to August 2022, based on code fatigue, financial fatigue, and just everything under the sun that's been stressing a lot of financial situations for many just residents of the area, if they'll really understand that the millage does play a huge role in the success of this organization, in addition to state and federal funding. And so I don't know if maybe showing that in this plot, they would understand that, oh, if we get to 2022, and there may be some naysayers out there that say like, well, I think doing another millage for the AAATA isn't a good use of tax money, and folks don't really have the picture and understanding that no, it actually, if we don't have that starting in 2024, let alone, I don't know when exactly that millage money, because you said it ends at the end of 2023, right? What that plot looks like if there isn't a millage in there, right? In 2024, and also just leading up to 2024. So it's just a thought I had of maybe illustrating so that we have better ideas to impact.
It's an excellent suggestion, and John's done some excellent pie charts in the past that break out our sources of revenue, and I think those really do a great job of illustrating the importance of that funding.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Other questions and comments?
Eric?
Jesse?
Oh,
Go ahead, Sue.
No,
Go ahead.
sorry, there's not a little hand for me to raise or a chat. So
Go ahead.
sorry to blurt in.
That's
I
all right.
don't have another way to give you a signal. I agree with everyone else. And, you know, I think, Matt, your point about how complicated all this is, it will be important to try to simplify, right? And I think as long as we continue to talk about how nimble and how flexible we're all going to need, there's just so much we can't predict, right? So you're attempting to sort of lay a course, which I think you're hearing from all of us, we agree with, but there are just some things we don't know. So as long as we continue to manage expectations by reminding folks that there are still some unknowns, I think that is just an important message, never to take for granted and to always kind of keep reiterating with, you know, all of the different circles where this will be discussed. And thanks for all the detail you did provide us. It was really helpful, very thoughtful, and thanks to the team as well, because I'm sure this was a huge effort to pull together to describe as well as you did. So thank you for the complexity.
Thank you, Sue. Jesse, I think you had a hand up.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate all the work and the thought that has gone into this, particularly trying to illustrate the risks that could be incurred with this. That said, I'm very much in favor of trying to restore our services. I think I said at the last meeting, you know, we need to have a service worth saving in order to. The point, so I'm not going to rehash any of the points that other people have brought up. The one that I wanted to say is regarding the how we go about it. I was very happy to hear you talking about the public involvement, because I see that as a very major danger, a very a strong point of danger, especially since one of the things we're talking about doing are addressing pre-existing issues as part of this conversation. I don't want, as I wouldn't want there to be an appearance that we're using this crisis as like some sort of smoke screen to, like, you know, to cover, like, to take advantage of this crisis to cover up problems that were pre-existing. So, you know, you call out the issues with underutilized routes from the 5-year TIP and the cost overruns from TheRide. You know, public comment is going to be crucial during this. You know, we were worried about public comment when we were talking about addressing these again before the pandemic, and we've taken some hits lately with our communications. So that, I think, needs to be a really strong point of focus. To do this in such a way that people aren't just given a chance to speak, but they are given confirmation that they are also being heard. Because I mean, it's one thing to give someone a microphone and then just, you know, turn it off and carry on. We need to listen as we're ever going to be making these plans.
Thank you. Anybody else? Others? Okay. My own comments are, I certainly can't disagree with August 2021. I mean, simply because you guys have done the modeling and the forward looking into this, and I don't have any facts or other empirical evidence to dispute it. So I think August 2021 looks as good as any. That's kind of my conclusion, and I don't take that just for a lukewarm, what the hell kind of endorsement. I think it's a I mean, I really hope that August 2021 really proves to be kind of the apex of where we hit the sweet spot. If anything, I think, and Rich kind of alluded to this, I would like to see even more financial modeling in terms of millage stuff. I would like to see even more financial modeling in terms of risk analysis, particularly with, what if the spike in use happens even before August 2021 and we have to pull it forward, or how quickly can we adjust if it seems like it's going to be appreciably later than August 2021. And I also agree with Mike's point that struck me as well, which is the state operating assistance is the biggest risk we have. And I'm not sure if we can really count on the federal government to step in because it is so divided, but we're going to have to make do with that. And I think our millage planning will have to very carefully consider if we see structural deficits and we see lower ridership, what does that do to our millage plans? And so I think some of the millage financial modeling, what does 0.7 look like? What does 1.0 look like? What does 0.6 look like in terms of our budget and our service restoration going forward? So that's down the road, but I think I'll certainly be interested in that going forward. So I'm happy to support August 2021, and I would hope that if we build good financial models that take account into some of these risks, then we can hopefully, if we look like we're going to veer off course, you can come back to the board in a timely way and say, yeah, doesn't look like we're going to hit that. It's going to be sooner, it's going to be later, and then we can adjust and the board can get some timely information. So thank you for this report. It's very helpful, and I fully support it. Hope it works out very well. Others? Mike?
I would just like to second a comment that Eric just made. It would be very nice if we could see some numbers with differing assumptions. I mean, we're looking at this chart and it makes a lot of assumptions there, and it varies. Basically, we're focusing on restoring the service and what that line is. And we've talked about risk and so forth, but it would be nice to see at some time, and I'm just saying would be nice and helpful. And I have to believe you're doing additional modeling, but to see, like what Eric suggested, at least another assumption that shows that service is demanded greater than this, and that somehow perhaps we have the money to pay for it, but also a less optimistic assumption on what, particularly what kinds of funding we have, which of course dictates what service we can provide.
I think those are excellent points, if I might respond. You may recall in the recovery plan initially, an earlier version of this chart that showed not two separate lines, but two lines and a space in between them. And that represented sort of a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario was actually state funding was cut by 30%. So John is capable of modeling that, and listening to some of these concerns is a great sort of lead into what's on your minds. the things you guys really want to hear. And when John's back from vacation, I will share that with him. And perhaps that gives us focus to continue this discussion next month, because I think we do have some time. I will share with you that I've already directed staff to begin planning as though we were going to restore full services. So they're already kind of moving in that direction. They've got a long way to go. I don't want to waste any time. And it's easier and faster for us to kind of pull back or stop that work than it would be to fast track it later. So this is good. It gives me some ideas of the sort of things we can elaborate on next month. And perhaps by that time, some of you will have thought of additional questions. Then we can continue to dig into them.
Raymond, you had a hand up?
Yeah, just I want to counterbalance maybe one other suggestion here too. Well, I think it is important for us to be fiscally prudent. I also want us to not overly limit ourselves. I think this is something I brought up in the Finance Committee and in some discussions with Matt, whereby we might look at what the possibilities are for the millage beyond, what's already been identified. As we all know, the millage was very heavily supported in the past, overwhelmingly, 85%, something like that. So I feel like there is some capacity to maybe shoot a little bit higher, maybe put together some of our wish list items, of which, this organization has many. I'm not suggesting we can, get everything we want out of it, but I think the fact that we have a 2022 millage opportunity, and then there's another opportunity in 2023 to go back out if it fails, for example, I think gives us some opportunities to do a couple different scenarios. So while I appreciate, the points that are being made about, if this funding falls out or whatever, and if the pie shrinks, I also want us to look at a situation whereby we increase the size of the pie. So let's also make sure that's part of our projections, that, yes, we have kind of a, status quo, we have a downward trend, but then what happens if we were to raise the bar a little bit? What would the possibilities be there? So I do want a little optimistic spin on things as well.
And if I might,
you can tell he's not a lawyer, but go ahead.
If I might, I think Raymond's making an excellent point there too. Perhaps as something of a misanthropic personality, maybe I look at the risks a little too much. We've also had some discussions internally about what if the needle swings in the other direction. And executive team, we've had discussions about what if there is a sudden opening of federal funding. It's not beyond belief. There are several very important ways this could happen. Coronavirus relief funding, infrastructure stimulus. President-elect Biden has talked very heavily about that. And infrastructure investment is a big way to jumpstart the economy that has a lot of bipartisan support. There is a transportation reauthorization bill lingering around. There are a lot of ways where this could sort of swing in the opposite direction, and all of a sudden we have a lot of money. That would be an amazing problem to have, and I am not allowing myself to dream too much about that right now. But we also make our own destiny, and to Raymond's point, we shouldn't constrain our thinking on the millage too much. Forrest and I are talking a lot about this separate question about the long-term planning and how it might affect a 2022 millage ask. I've written a 1.0 and a 0.07 on these charts merely to illustrate for you what it means to our financial cash flow. There's nothing to say we wouldn't have good reason to think maybe the community wants us to do more. It's entirely possible that they would be willing to support a higher level of investment. But that's a discussion on a parallel track for maybe another month.
Kathleen, did you have a hand up? Sorry.
I just wanted to say I appreciated all the work that went into this. It's a lot of guesswork, a lot of uncertainty, and we're in the middle of this new lockdown. Things are looking sort of weird. But I just want to say that as I'm listening to all this, I sort of want to reformulate in my head. We're looking at 2021 to restore full service, but in the meantime, we've been doing a pretty good job of introducing and adding service and expanding. That is something that I want some assurance for the public. That is really still going to continue. There may be possibilities in January or February. We're going to continue to monitor our routes and see where we're lacking or where public need is arising. And so while we're looking at 2021 as a full service area, we're not stopping at where we are right now. We're still going to continue to look at introducing or expanding as we can and as the public needs, correct?
That is absolutely correct. There are certain windows, partially dictated by our union contract about how quickly we can do that. But November, yes, I think we're doing public consultation now. January, we have some aspirations, and I will not close the door on changes, in May or June as well. Those are windows for us as well. But we do kind of want to plant a flag, have a blueprint that board, staff, the public, riders can all sort of get their head around. So you're absolutely correct. We're not waiting, but hopefully August would be sort of the big push.
Mike?
I don't know how many times in our conversation tonight and also in the briefing materials, I have used and almost everybody else who's talked has used the term full service. And I'm not sure that, I would kind of guess that everybody here has a little bit different interpretation of what that means. I can't believe it means identical to what it was before we had to reduce it. And I would like to hear Matt's current understanding of what that means. And also, of course, talking about that really brings up ridership versus coverage. It's got to be an important issue about what to restore and how to restore it. And I'm sure it's not going to be identical to what it was before, and it shouldn't be, in my opinion. And to me, this elevates the ridership coverage discussion to the top of what should be our board agendas in the future.
Thank you, and it's an excellent question. What does full service mean? And I'm happy to elaborate a little bit. And I'll even, when I get it wrong, I'll ask my colleagues, Mr. Smith and Mr. Yang, to jump in and correct me. I really, put the spurs to executive team to get this together and begin to sort out a lot of the details to the extent we could. So I really have a great team, and I am very, very fortunate to be able to rely on them. We had sort of detailed discussions about where do we go from here. We had the 5-year TIP services that were running before the pandemic. That's what sort of most people expected of us. It's what was commonly understood as the promise that was kept. And then when we changed in the pandemic, first we dropped down to Sunday levels of service. Well, first we dropped to like Saturday, and then Saturday plus, and then Sunday. It was a very rapid retraction of service. But we ended up with Brian's excellent leadership with a very stable temporary route structure, which has been a huge asset for us and is doing a lot for the community. But it did create a couple of holes in it that we're trying to plug for November. We talked about, when we talk about full service, and I hope this came through today, What I'm really talking about is the full expenses. So you could sort of think about it as a funding envelope. We were spending, let's hypothetically say, $100 on service before the pandemic. Right now we're spending about $66. So we want to add back in $34 or $44. How exactly it's going to be organized is something Forrest is working very hard on right now. We discussed, do we try to take the temporary routes we have now and scale them up? Or do we take the 5Y TIP routes that existed before and kind of scale them down a little bit? There are some new challenges that have jumped up. The best example is service to St. Joe's Hospital. We are still in a pandemic, and even after the vaccine is available, service to major medical facilities is going to be a priority. One of the biggest requests for service we had before the pandemic was weekend service to St. Joe's, which we didn't do. Well, we're doing it now, and we cannot in good conscience eliminate it, especially while the pandemic is ongoing, and likely there are going to be needs for medical services even after. So we feel strongly that we're going to need to continue to have weekend access to St. Joe's. But that money is going to have to come from somewhere. So we're going to have to trim some other part of the route structure and transfer resources over there. We have a few other moments like that Forrest is sorting through. We also have some challenges with the 5Y TIP structure we're trying to grapple with without changing too much. You may recall we were struggling with on-time performance before the pandemic arrived. It was largely induced by traffic, but it was also a reality that, the bus was given 45 minutes to get from terminal to terminal on Washtenaw Avenue 20 years ago. And today it still only has 45 minutes to get from terminal to terminal. But traffic has gotten much worse, and there are far more people paying to get on and off the bus. So that creates the on-time performance problems. We're going to try to surgically tweak a few things buried in the route structure as best we can. But Forrest's already set a hard deadline. At a certain point in January, he's just going to have to cut it off and say, we've done everything we can do. We need to move forward. It's largely going to be a tweak. It's going to look a lot like the 5Y TIP services, but probably with some shifts. If we're going to pay for St. Joe's, we're going to have to cut something else. That information is going to come forward from Forrest, like I say, in late January, February, March. The other thing I think it's important we have to acknowledge, and that is an issue, is TheRide. Before the pandemic, it was a major part of our services, and it will continue to be. It was also a very expensive part of the service that we saw expenses growing faster there than anywhere else. And that's because the structure of the service made cost control virtually impossible. You may recall we commissioned a consultant study. We talked to LAC. I believe we've presented it to you on several occasions before the pandemic arrived. We're going to have to make a decision for TheRide about how we bring it back, how fast we bring it back, and in what form. That consultant study had given us a blueprint for doing that, where we bring back all of the services, but frankly, we may focus on the ADA mandated paratransit service, and the other services that were there maybe become, they're still available, but we may have to frankly charge a premium fare for those sorts of things. So we're going to have to tussle that stuff out as well. Those details are still being discussed by staff, and I think they're going to start coming out in, I think, late February. So when we say full service, what I mean is really full expenditures, roughly what we were doing before. But there are going to be changes. It'll be very familiar, but there will be some changes. Forrest, Brian, is there anything you would add to that description?
Thanks, Matt. I think you did a great job to explain it. One thing I want to mention, since Mike, talking about the ridership and coverage, I think from what we learned through this pandemic, one of the principles we're going to, as our guideline for this service plan development, is maintaining similar service coverage. And then, as you can tell, there are a lot of people this is their only way to travel, or one of few ways to travel. So we learned quite a bit from this pandemic. We will try to incorporate those lessons learned into the service design. But given the very tight timeline, we can only do so much between now and January. But we'll try to incorporate as much as we could. Especially Brand did a lot of town halls, public engagement. We heard a lot from the community. So those are kind of our bases to fill in the service plan. So, thanks.
Brian, is there anything you'd add?
No, not at this point.
Any other board members with questions at this point on the service restoration plan? All right, we'll move on then to the Q4 service report. And I think that will go to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief about this. Our report includes a lot of large percentages that you wouldn't normally see, where ridership is down and it has had a disproportionate effect on some of the ratios that we display. But I would like to really just start out with how proud I am to work for TheRide and the people that I work with, both on the front lines and in the office and at home. It has absolutely been a team effort to get all of the service done over this last quarter and the last 6 months, with our primary focus on staying safe, both for our employees and our passengers. As mentioned, I think briefly earlier, we are rolling out some new service this Sunday. We've added back a modified Route 26 and weekend service on TheRide, and would like to give a shout out specifically to board member Kathleen Mozak-Betts for attending those town halls. So I got to brag to the folks that were listening that we had a board member in attendance and their thoughts were being heard directly. So thank you very much for that, and would be happy to take any questions anybody has at this time.
Any questions on the service report? Okay, Jesse?
A couple of questions about TheRide. I thought it was a little strange looking at the TheRide boardings, that they seem, if I'm reading your spreadsheet right, like with the West service area pretty consistent from Q4 of 2019 to Q4 of 2020. They're both in the 1,300 range, and that there's actually been a decrease in the east service area. I had a specific question about that, and I all I wrote was a question mark. Should I be impressed that the West Side numbers have remained flat during COVID, or should I be wondering why we haven't seen a substantial change?
Well, I guess when I looked at those numbers, what I was gratified to see was that the increase in Q4 of this year, to me, indicated that as a temporary substitute for fixed routes, that it was working, and that as we go forward and continue to collect data, we'll be able to tell, is it more efficient to make some parts of these routes accessible, via FlexRide as opposed to a fixed route. And then one of the big changes that we made was allowing the FlexRide to drop off at the YTC. And it will be interesting to see how many of these trips end up doing that and how useful that is. So that was what I took from it. Not so much the difference between the two, but rather just that it was showing to me that it was working.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. My second question was then, what kind of data are you collecting on the FlexRide, the FlexRide, like pickup? Are you collecting location data on pickup drop off? And I'm wondering if that information would be useful in terms of developing our and in the long-term future routes, but also like where, but just service restoration.
Yes, we are, and that's exactly what we would want to use it for.
Thank you.
Others on the service plan, Q4? Kyra?
Ryan, quick question. On the report, there's a mention on an increase in ridership of the fixed route service from Q3 to Q4, attributable to easing restrictions in the area. Do we think that that is also mostly an effect of the students? And if that is a big consideration, are we concerned about now knowing that the students won't be coming back for a winter term?
So in terms of concern, I guess I need to be qualified in my statement. For as long as we have the pandemic and a suggestion for reduced capacity on the buses, like the maximum 20 passengers and a limited route structure, it sounds so odd to say, but I'm actually not all that concerned about not having students to transport. It means that the folks that are riding that have typically at this point, the folks that are riding are folks without other options. We've even heard that at the service committee, that one of the board members, had colleagues saying, well, it says essential trip, so I haven't been riding. If they haven't been riding, they had some other choice. I'm not overly concerned about those folks not being back for the spring or the winter season. I think it does make our challenge that much harder when there is a vaccine and when we are able to go back to full service, because people do establish patterns on how they travel. And so we'll have to break into those into those habits and convince them that we're the better option. But I'm an optimist and will say that I think we can do that. But up until we have a widely distributed vaccine, I'm actually not that worried about having low passenger counts. And I frankly do expect these to remain pretty flat now going forward, if not decline a little as travel restrictions and what have you decrease.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments or questions?
I'd like to offer one preview. Brian's report, as he mentioned, you see some staggering percentage changes. It's just really unprecedented in my experience to see, 70% change in one thing and 100 and something percent change in something else. That's very unusual. As a preview for the ends report that you're going to be receiving next month, be prepared for similar volatility. The collapse of ridership has really thrown off a lot of the math, and we use a lot of fractions. So it's going to look interesting, but thankfully it's hopefully a temporary situation.
Any other comments or questions? If not, we can go to the Q. Jesse?
I'm sorry, I have one. Kyra's point remind me about this. In reading the Finance Committee report, I saw Mr. Hess had asked about the essential trips, and the response was that staff would be looking at whether the executive orders that triggered this may no longer be in place. Has there been any work on that? Is there planned work on that?
Brian and I discussed it not long after the meeting, and not long after that, the new restrictions came in. We will be keeping the words essential trip on the bus for the foreseeable future. I hate to say that. We'd love to be welcoming people back and rolling out the red carpet. Now's not the time.
Has there been a discussion about what would trigger taking that down? I mean, I understand we're in a new peak right now, so that, you know, it makes total sense. You know, we're not supposed to be gathering in like the groups of 10, I think, indoors, and I guess a bus is indoors. But what did this prompt a discussion of what the trigger is for taking that down?
No, honestly, we're kind of going from one thing to another sometimes, and if it's not service restoration or a couple other big things, we kind of go with what's the as Brian eloquently put it, what's the alligator closest to the boat? We'll hit that one, and then go to the next one. I imagine, you know, we don't have really, you know, I'm not going to say we got a quantitative trigger. We're not that precise. We rely a lot on the county health department to kind of signal to us things are getting safer or not. You know, orders from the state government are a big deal. I wish I could say direct leadership from the federal government was taken into account, but honestly, not a lot there to account for. So we kind of read the tea leaves of what the health officials that we trust are saying, and make our best judgments on that. I think we'd have to see a very different situation with the caseloads than what we do now to take that essential trips down. At the same time, it's not like we have bouncers by the buses. We're not asking you why you're traveling. So if people are traveling for whatever reason they want, we're not discouraging it. We just, you know, we want to be there for the people who need us the most, the hospital workers, people who have no other options, things like that.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. We'll move on to the Q4 finance report, and I think Ms. Thompson will take this from here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I think Mike is going to help me out and put my presentation up for me. I'll give him a second. Okay. All right. All right, before we jump into the report, I just want to emphasize, just as I did for the Finance Committee, that this is a first close report, which means essentially that we are, and we were still working to finalize numbers such as depreciation expense or post-retirement expense. But we wanted to, as always, give you an idea of what our fourth quarter looked like, even though the numbers are not final. We have an audit that is coming up at the very end of this month. And so we will be coming back with a second close report so you can see the final numbers or very close to the final numbers. With that said, I will jump into the fourth quarter results and just hit a couple highlights. If we could go to the next slide, Mike. Okay. So, as many of you imagine, the quarter was still very heavily impacted by the pandemic, and we are estimating a zero net income for the quarter. Our revenue was significantly different from the budget at 41.5 million. And the only revenue category that did not decrease was property taxes. We have not seen an impact from the pandemic yet, or maybe we never will. I'm not sure. We're not sure at this point about property taxes. So those did stay strong for the quarter. Our expenses followed that same trend as revenue due to our lower demand in our services, and was at 41.5 million as well. And if you could go to the next slide, Mike. And then moving on to the balance sheet, we maintained a strong net position, and we had a strong cash reserve still of 2.6 months, and that's primarily due to lower expense and our property tax revenue that kept that cash reserve strong. Just one thing that I do want to know on the balance sheet is our investments. You'll notice that in the prior year, we had a higher level of investments. And this year we did not, because the interest rates became so low that actually keeping it within our regular operating bank accounts was more profitable for the authority than our usual investments. We did talk to the bank though, and we did move them $5 million October 1st to a different vehicle, CDARS, so that we could get a little more investment income. Not much more, but it was better than sitting in the operating cash. And then on the last slide, I just want to note that the trend is still consistent as far as cash and investments. Those still went up, as you may expect with the property taxes coming up. We had a little bit of a higher cash and investment because property tax revenue goes up a little bit each year because of taxable value, and also the lower expenses. So I kept it short and sweet, but I will entertain any questions at this time that the board may have.
Okay. Any questions from board members on the Q4 finance report? Mike?
Thanks, Latasha. And let me mention that Latasha went into more detail at the Finance Committee meeting. And of course, there's a whole lot more detail in the board package and the typical format of the quarterly report. But the one thing that I think it would be good to expand on, Latasha, that people both in our board and I think in the public are interested in is the expenditures of the CARES Act. And you have a nice summary in the detailed fourth quarter report. And I think it would be good to mention something about that.
Sure. Right now, we are expecting to use about 2.2 million. As I said, the numbers are not final, so that may fluctuate a little bit. We still have wiggle room to decrease or increase that number. That's not a number set in stone at this point, if that's what you were looking for.
Yes, that and the fact, I think it's important to mention the fact that the amount of utilization of the CARES Act is really determined by our financials without using the CARES Act, and therefore you're showing for the full year a break even. But the CARES Act is used to come out exactly or approximately break even.
That's absolutely right, Mike. So just for instance, if we get to our final numbers and the expenses jump up, we would use more of that CARES Act so that we still come out even. So that is correct.
Other questions about the finance report? Anybody on the phone that I can't see?
I'm good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Latasha. Then we'll finalize this section 4.4 with the CEO report. Back to Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments in addition to the written material. As it says here, the Watts Policy Committee didn't meet in October, but we did meet yesterday. And TheRide was very happy to be able to help out the city of Ypsilanti. The city is attempting to do some pedestrian and non-motorized improvements, I think along Hamilton and a few other major corridors in the city, but they were a little short of money. Meanwhile, we had access to some federal funding that it looked like, we just weren't on track to be able to use in a timely manner. So John got a request from Bonnie at the city. Is there anything we could do to help? It kind of worked its way through Watts. John came to me and said, it would be a neighborly thing to do, and we can still get a couple of our bus stops paved too. So we said, wonderful. And yesterday we were happy to be able to help out the city. And I'm happy to say they did get all the funding that they were looking for that improvement, including our contributions. So we'll make more of a note of that in next month's report, but I thought it was worth mentioning this evening because we're kind of all in this together, and every bus passenger is a pedestrian at the beginning and end of their trips. So we care about the sidewalks. So hopefully they can get a lot of them paved and updated with that. The other thing I just wanted to point to on the last page was the preliminary feedback from the virtual tour of the prototype Nova bus. Generally, customers were pretty excited about it. People liked a lot of the features. I know a couple of you had expressed an interest in having a tour. I hope you did. I hope you were able to physically see the bus, and I'd love to hear what you think of it. One thing that was a bit surprising to me, but in retrospect probably shouldn't have been, was the feedback we got about the propulsion system. And that was not the subject of our question, but I perceive it to be kind of an ownership linkage issue for you. So I just wanted to note it. We did get a large number of written comments encouraging us to look for clean propulsion technology, either electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. So I just wanted you to hear that the moral ownership still care very strongly about that sort of thing, and it's still something that we're interested in as well. We're participating in the City of Ann Arbor's carbon neutrality project. I was sitting in on an advisory committee with that the other day, and I was very interested to hear from the Ann Arbor Public School Board, who have bought a couple of electric school buses, and was gratified to hear that they do have a lot of the same mechanical concerns with the technology that we have, but they're able, for a variety of reasons, to put their toe in the water a little before we can. And they do have a couple, and they're able to use them, and they're interested in running that experiment. So I did want you to know that we had received that feedback. The moral owners are still very interested in the environment. I don't believe that would be a surprise to anyone here, but I thought you should hear it. So with that, happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions from board members? Kathleen?
I don't know if this is the appropriate place to ask this, but with the new orders that have been given, I know that we've recently reopened the transit centers and things like that. How is that affecting that? Are we going to keep them open with the new orders, or are we closing them? Are the bathrooms available for persons who need them? I know that the public is very concerned with winter coming. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, and I'll ask Brian to maybe step in. I know we haven't talked about it specifically, but Brian, do you want to offer some thoughts?
Certainly. We've delayed opening up the Blake and the YTC for just purely waiting for the bus. The Blake is open for ticket sales, and the bathrooms are open at both transfer centers. So those are open and available. And at the moment, we don't have any intention on, I have not heard and had anybody make a suggestion that we consider shutting them back down. They are cleaned twice a day. So we're we're still making sure we have followed those protocols. As far as having a location for people to wait for the bus out of the cold and the rain, we're taking that slowly. One of the things we wanted to do was make sure that we had spots at both locations before we opened one up, and then made anything that looked like it wasn't universal or equitable across both locations. We're in the process of getting tents put up in Ypsilanti because we don't have enough room inside the building because the building is undersized. But we are having to go through the building permit process for that. So as soon as that's done, there'll be locations at least under roof in Ypsilanti, and then we'll kind of make a judgment call from there about what we do about the Blake.
Have we considered, I know a lot of restaurants have outdoor seating and they have warming centers, warming apparatuses. Have we considered using something like that if we can't get our centers opened?
Yes, Gail has actually, our facilities manager has engaged with our electrician about putting in electric heating elements outside, and also is getting a source for temporary propane ones as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, did you just say we needed to get a building permit to put up a tent?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome to Ann Arbor. Grizzly Adams, you had a question?
Thank you. Just a bit of information. My understanding on the state health law. Hey, when you're wearing a mask all day long, it's kind of stupid to shave every morning. My understanding from the state is that outside, tents outside can be defined as a roof in one side. But if you have more than one side, you're considered, at least from dining, you're considered inside, not outside. I don't know if that affects your tent plans at all, but thought I'd pass that along.
Thank you.
Mike, you had a hand up? Go ahead.
Matt, there was one development at the Ann Arbor City Council having to do with transit-supported development that occurred after you prepared this report. Maybe you could briefly summarize that and say what implications it might have for AAATA.
Thank you, Mike. You're absolutely right. That is absolutely something we should be sharing. The new Ann Arbor City Council was seated Tuesday, very, very recently. And I think they had their first meeting on Tuesday, excuse me. And as if anyone who follows Ann Arbor politics might be aware, Mayor Taylor has a lot more sort of like-minded colleagues on council. They resurrected a transit-oriented development proposal that had been tabled either much earlier in 2020 or even 2019. And initially I misunderstood it. It happened quite quickly. I had to go back and watch the video of the discussion. Ultimately, they passed a resolution directing the Planning Commission to come back to them with a citywide transit-oriented development ordinance. I'm a little unclear exactly what this means, but it seems that the thrust of it is to allow higher density mixed-use development along major transit corridors in the community. At first, I had thought it was more limited in scope, maybe focusing on just one part of the city. But when I learned that it was actually citywide, I got quite excited. You all may recall that you have ENDS policies specifically that pertain to urban development being transit supportive. This would be possibly a very big step in that direction. So I immediately got on the horn to some colleagues in the city, got a little more information about it. They're very, very eager now that it's sort of a serious going concern. They're very eager to sit down with us to make sure that the ride's involved in how this develops. So it was a very big development, happened very quickly, and didn't get unanimous support, but strong majority. So a big development. Christmas came early, I guess.
Yeah, and that is good news. I mean, the city's been talking about TOD for a long, long time, since I was on the planning commission in the mid 2000s even. So it's nice to see the city council take action on this. Look forward to working with them on it. Anybody else on the CEO report? Okay, we'll close out section 4, section 5, emergent business. Any emergent business? Section 6, closing items. We'll have the ends report on the next meeting. Maybe have some developments along the lines of board retreat, and certainly look forward to more discussion about the service restoration and millage plan, which we talked at length about this evening. 6.2, we'll go to public comment now. Again, if you want to address the board this evening, please hit the raise your hand button on the display, or you can hit *9, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. So, Keith, do we have anybody who's waiting to address the board at this point in time?
Yes, we do, Chairman Mahler. We have Mr. Jim Mogensen. Mr. Mogensen, you've been unmuted.
Yes, this is Jim Mogensen. So a couple things. So I've been getting, people know I'm interested in transit type things, and so they ask me questions and give me feedback. And so I just wanted to let you know, at the last board meeting, at the end of the meeting, I mused that maybe some of the ridership that when the university came back in September hadn't gone up because enough people at the university are working at home that the stress on the parking system is less. And maybe that's why people are now driving in and not, and because, and it doesn't look like the traffic is getting worse, because it's not, because, and I've been able to, since that time, I've been able to confirm that that is in fact what is happening. People have told me that is indeed what is happening. And I bring this up because the interesting question will be, this has been a societal change, and that the societal change may not be entirely linked to pandemic control. If the cultural change about people working from home continues beyond, even beyond pandemic infection control, that may influence the transit dynamics. The second thing I wanted to bring up is that there are 2 millages. There's the 5-year TIP, what I think of as the overlay millage, the 0.7 mil millage. And then there's the structural Ann Arbor millage that was passed in 1973. And because of when it was passed, it doesn't have to be renewed. So it's just kind of there. And I bring that up because then if the challenge is that it's changed the internal dynamics of the financing of the ride between the east and the west parts of the service area. And so you would have a situation in which the transit millage is still in place in Ann Arbor, even if the 0.7 millage left, but it would dramatically increase how that service would be created. So I will continue to assemble some other comments and forward them on to the staff and then on to the board. Thank you very much for your time. Oh, I remember one. You should have LAC style committees that you assemble, given the complexity of the questions that were even brought up tonight. I think you have to not just have public town halls, but you need to have some special committees to chew through some of these things and explain the incredible complexities of all of this thing. Thank you very much, as always, for your time and attention.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
We do not have anyone else at this time, Chairman Muller.
All right, thank you. So we'll close the public comment period. Please fill out the board assessment meeting electronic version in the packet and submit that back to Keith. And I think we're ready for a motion for adjournment.
Oh, actually, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Rich.
Topics for next meeting. I was wondering if I could be thrown out there. So the ATA started to use, I think, a new mobile app. I was kind of curious how that was going. So maybe we could discuss that either in committee or at the next board meeting, or get an update on.
Is the question about the fare payment app?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's great. All right, thanks.
Anything else? Somebody like to make a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
A second? Kathleen?
Second.
Thank you. We'll go down and say yes or no for adjournment. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
I'm also yes. So thank you, everybody, for a good meeting, and we are adjourned.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.